All right, so getting started, our first speaker is Dr. Andrew Leach, who'll be speaking to us about the nerd value of solar power. Andrew Leach, pronouns he, him, is an economist working on climate change and energy policies. Outside of work hours, his 2 kids, cycling, and arguing on Twitter keep him busy. So please go ahead, Andrew. We're looking forward to your presentation.
So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Amina. Thanks, Future Energy Systems, for welcoming me for this. And apologies if I'm a little bit frazzled. My computer decided to lock me out over the last half hour, and I just managed to get back in. So what I want to talk to you about today is a relatively small energy system. As Amina said, can be anything from the size of your house to the global energy market. And I'm going to tell you about a particular part of mine, which is my energy system, which is the solar power system that we have on our house at home, and a little bit about why we added it, how it works, how much it costs, how do we get paid, how much do we make from it, and then eventually I hope answer some questions that you might have about it. So the first question that most people have is, what is it? So this is an install picture of our solar power system. It's on our garage. It's 7.6 kilowatts installed capacity. It's south-facing, and we basically are able to live most of the year without tree shading. Shoulder season, we get some interference from trees from our neighbors. And we had the advantage of having a garage that was purpose-built for a solar array installed. And I tracked data with 2 systems, a Neurio and an AP Systems monitor, that let me download a whole bunch of information from it, which is related to the nerd value that we're going to talk about. So why did this happen? Why did we end up with solar? Why did we want to change our interaction with the electricity utility? Basically, this is my students' fault. I used to run an assignment in my class when I taught our Buick 463 and 563 classes in the business school to ask them to evaluate financially a solar power system for my house. And I'd give them all of the information in my house. I'd give them an up-to-date quote, and I'd send them out to learn about the solar market, how it works. And basically every year that they do this, they'd reliably come back and say, no, sorry, it just doesn't make financial sense. Even if you factor in Alberta had a carbon price at the time, et cetera. And even with that all factored in, it didn't make the grade. But then in 2017, one of the groups came to me and said, they gave their presentation and they said, yeah, it only returns you maybe 1%, not even. You'd be better off to lump down your mortgage if all you care about is the electricity. But they said, if this would generate a cup of coffee a day of nerd value for you, and we think it would, it's the equivalent of a 20% rate of return. And so they knew me well enough that, here we go. And essentially I arrived home and had to inform my family that we were now going to spend $13,230 on a solar power system because of the excellent presentation that my students had given me in class. Now, that was only part of the cost of the system. We did have some rebate when we put it in from Energy Efficiency Alberta that covered a little bit of or a substantial proportion, 30% of the cost. And so now we're essentially taking a big bet on a larger energy system, which is Alberta's power market, because our return on that $13,230 is going to depend on what happens with electricity prices, contracts, and a little bit about how our market works overall. And so let's start with some basics. How much does it generate? So these are my annual average curves, just so you get a sense of, November, December, January, and February tend to be terrible because of low sun angle and because of snow cover. And May, June, and July are great in terms of generating solar power. But these are averages. There's a whole bunch of variation in between. So we have sunny days. These are hourly data, so they're a little choppy, but it just makes the graphs a little bit easier to generate. And so again, you have good years, bad years, good days, bad days. It's quite variable. And so most of the year, it does what you'd predict. It produces power, more than enough power to power our house in the middle of the day, even sometimes in November, December, January, and February, although not very often, not very many hours. And in the summer, we produce a whole lot of extra power. And in the winter, we produce, on average, very little. So we have a seasonal issue. And of course, again, this varies a lot from day to day and from hour to hour as well. But what you really care about, I guess if you're me and you're an economist, is how does this actually show up on my bill? And so our solar powers provide energy. Think of our house as having first call on that energy. So before it goes anywhere, if we can use it, we will, and our house will prioritize using solar. But if there's extra energy either required by our house or generated by our house, either way, essentially our meter either flows forward or backwards. And for the energy itself, we pay the same price for what we sell back to the grid as what we buy from the grid in any given month. The difference, of course, is that there are other charges on your bill, transmission, distribution, etc. On those, we pay based on the total deliveries, not on the net deliveries for the month. So everything that comes in, these blue arrows, anything that's in that, we pay transmission and distribution charges on those. So here's what it's looked like for us over the last few years in our little household energy system. So in the summertime, so in the dark blue line is if we'd have just signed up for the regulated rate electricity contracts, paid the prices associated with our consumption, this would have been every monthly bill we've had since we put our solar panels in December or August of 2017 for the variable charges that are associated with energy transmission and distribution. The light blue line is what we've actually paid because of both our solar project and our ability to essentially choose what contract works best for us in which month of the year. And what you can see from this is that overall, we've saved on average about $70 a month from having this solar power system installed. And so if you want to do the back of the envelope math on this, if you can do net present values on the back of an envelope, I certainly can. I'll use my computer. But the past year, we've been at about $1,000 a year total savings, so a little better than average. But if we extended these past 4 years' returns out to the rest of the horizon of our system, we'd probably earn a financial return of about 4%. But now the question is, were my students right? So 4% is probably better than lumping down on my mortgage anyway, but what about the nerd value? And I thought I'd show you a few fun things to give you a sense of the enjoyment that I get out of having this little added part to our energy system. So the most fun I've certainly had with it, about a month after our solar system was installed, we had a solar eclipse here in Edmonton that some of you will remember. And it was fascinating to be able to sit in my basement and track the solar eclipse from literally the moment that it began. You could see the generation wheel off of our solar system, and we had an almost cloudless sky. It was great for the first half. Second half was a little more interrupted, so we didn't get a perfect curve off of it, but it was pretty close. You can also run some other experiments. So for example, this is me on Boxing Day heading out into my backyard to see how much of a difference would it make if I shoveled off or brushed off my solar panels. So I built myself a little solar panel brush and cleared them off to see what difference it would make. The answer is it probably isn't worth doing, but it's a fun little experiment, and it occupied me for a few minutes on a Boxing Day holiday. And there's a bunch of these other ones. I didn't include them all in this deck because I wanted to make sure I stayed under my time. But you can look at how wildfire smoke affects it, rainy days versus cloudy days, all sorts of different information. But generally speaking, if I add in and I take my students' initial conclusion here, if I add in my cup of coffee a day of nerd value, which I think is probably an underestimate for how much I get out of it, they were actually pretty darn close. That would push my return to about 19%. So that's probably a good proxy for not only my ability to play with data, but my ability to use it for events like this, as well as to teach my students about the solar energy regulation and solar power systems. So I think my students did a pretty good job. So this is, I hope, a little bit of a starting point for you to think about the fact that energy systems are all around us, and one of the ones that we interact with the most on a day-to-day basis is this is the one that's in our own house or our own apartment, and how that relationship is changing to now be one where we have more of a two-way street where technology allows us not only to be straight consumers of electricity in this case, but also producers of electricity, storers of electricity, etc. And so you'll hear more from my colleagues coming up about other parts of the larger energy system. And of course, that all fits into how I can earn dollars from my solar power system. But I think it was nice to be able to start with a small one pretty close to home, and hopefully you found this an interesting trip into the world of solar power. So thanks for the invitation, and look forward to my colleagues and to your questions.